But you still, oh, we will hear. Oh, you told me I wasn't going to hear. Okay. No, that's fine. That's probably better. It doesn't feel so awkward. All right, cool. All right, yeah, so anyone just walking in, I'm Adam Besmick. We're going to be getting to know atomic design today. A few quick things about myself. I hail from the wonderful city of La Crosse, Wisconsin. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of La Crosse. We're pretty ecstatic about our beer. Oktoberfest is a pretty big deal there. And I've been known to enjoy an IPA from time to time. I am the senior front-end developer at Virtual here at Health Partners in the Twin Cities. When people ask me what I do for a living, I usually just tell them that I make the web look pretty. Usually people get a kick out of that. It's a lot easier than telling them everything I actually do. So, but yeah, that's also kind of what I'm here to talk to you guys about today, and that's how atomic design can do that for you. Just a warning ahead of time. So today we're not going to be talking about like responsive web design practices, like best practices or execution tactics. I'm not going to talk about flat design, mobile first. I don't really care about like your guys' artboards or Zeppelin. They're all like really cool things, but that's not what we're here to talk about today. This talk is intended to get you thinking about your web interfaces and the design systems you're using with them before you even write a line of code or even open up a PSD. So if you were hoping to get some best practices out of responsive web design today, like here's your chance. You can go find another talk, but I think you might enjoy it if you stay. So with that said, I'd like to start by giving credit where credit is due and give a big thank you to this guy. Nope, wait, sorry. There we go, this guy, Brad Frost. So he's kind of the brains behind this thing we call atomic design. But hold on to that thought for a second. First, I want to tell you a story. So once upon a time, there were these things called books. And books, they consisted of these things called pages. Do you guys remember these? Okay, good. So you turn a page, it'd rip, you cut your finger, have to dog ear a corner to remember where you were. They were pretty terrible. Thankfully, these things aren't around anymore. And you guys can all thank this guy for that. But now what we have today are these pages, right? So somehow this concept of pages is carried over into the web. It's been a common term we've been hearing as designers and developers for quite some time, even since the good old days of GeoCities and the Ralph Macchio homepage. And to be honest, the Ralph Macchio homepage probably looked pretty good on our old Apple devices. The problem is this is no longer the web we're working with. The idea of pixel perfect design and everything looking the same across devices is not the case. This is a lot more like our reality. All you have to do is look at a laptop, a tablet, a mobile device, and immediately like the pages that we're designing can't look the same across all these different devices. Today we live in a sea of smartphones, dumb phones, MacBooks, notebooks, tablets, web TVs, game consoles, and a whole bunch of other things that can access the web. And who knows what's next, right? So as designers and developers, we're really forced to build these applications that are supposed to work across all these different screen sizes. However, our processes haven't quite caught up. So these right here, these are what we show our stakeholders that we've designed. Or as developers, a lot of times this is what we receive, and then we're asked to create a responsive interface out of it, which to me is really just kind of a crazy waste of time. So instead, what we need to do is we need to blow these things up. So we can see all the pieces kind of come tumbling down into a pile. Then we can take a moment and stop and think. We can ask ourselves, what are our interfaces made of? Which Lego pieces are important to us, and how are we going to assemble them to build our interfaces? And a lot of us are already doing it to some extent. We'll take a page and we'll deconstruct it and we'll put it back together. The problem is that our gaze remains fixed on this final product, rather than identifying the underlying patterns that make up our final UIs. So if we do take some time and we start to think about it and we start to organize the pieces, we can start putting them together in a more deliberate manner. And we can create more robust interfaces out of it. And this is nothing new to us. We've seen this type of modularity for 100 years now. And it's great. It's good we have these practices. But we need to start thinking about it earlier on in the process. We need to get this methodology ingrained into our workflow. Thankfully, we're starting to see a shift in our industry, and people are starting to think about design systems rather than just pages. And through this shift, there have been a lot of different approaches to execute responsive web designs, one of which is called style tiles. So style tiles, they show an abstract view of a few specific components of your interface. You can experiment and compare designs and figure out what feels right. You can start to get a sense of color, typography, and the overall mood that you're going to have for the UI. There's this company called Sparkbox, and they took style tiles a step further, and they created style prototypes. This way you can actually see what these things are going to look like in the browser. And it's pretty cool. It breaks down and highlights a few important pieces of the UI. You can see what your logos are going to look like, headlines, paragraphs. You start to see button styles, and they're actually like their interactive states. So you start to see hovers and transitions. Well, if we can create style prototypes in the browser, why not just create a whole style guide in the browser? So we can just create them as like standalone websites, starting to sound pretty cool, and they'll help us in a lot of ways. They'd help us promote consistency across all of our interfaces. We would have a common vocabulary for everyone to use as we're talking about our UIs. It'd be a great reference point, making it easier for people to test and QA things. You can add it to your processes and your workflow, and then everything would stay in sync. And at the end of the day, you'd have like a really useful reference tool that you could use. And there's actually quite a few of them out there. So Brett Jankard created the style guide boilerplate, and you can go find this repo and pull it down and create your own style guide just using this boilerplate. It's got base HTML elements, buttons, headings, everything you need to really start creating some kind of UI. Robert Paul Lloyd created Barebones, which, if anyone's familiar with Pattern Primer, it's an extension of that, and it allows you just to create this really cool style guide real seamlessly. And a lot of different companies are putting their style guides out in the wild as well. So Yelp has released theirs out to the public, and you can go check it out. It doesn't only highlight their web style guides, but it also talks about their app style guides and even their brand style guides. MailChimp has a beautifully clean pattern library, very sharp. And even this guy, right? Back to him again. So Brad Frost maintains a pattern library called Responsive Patterns. And new things are constantly being added to it because our UIs and our interfaces are constantly changing. And there's plenty of examples out there that you can go check out. You can pull down the repos, and you can get started on your own project, and you should. Because honestly, they're pretty awesome. But they do have some pitfalls as well. So first off, they're super hard to make. That's number one is they take a lot of time. And I don't know about you guys, but I don't have just some spare time and during my work day to just be like, oh yeah, I'll just throw together a style guide for our website. They're often treated as side projects. It's a lot of times it's hard to convince the business that there's a ROI on these kinds of projects. Many times they're an afterthought, and they become lower priority after a project's launched. Sometimes they can be too abstract and they don't cover everything that's in your interfaces. And they're often only seen as designer and developer tools that have no relevance to the business. Most of the time they become incomplete or never fully finished. But most importantly, they lack methodology. So by now, I'm surprised that nobody's raised their hand and been like, Adam, just stop. Just wait a minute. I got an idea. Why don't you just use a framework? And, frameworks are cool. They're already created to be modular, as we talked about. They already follow best practices for responsive web design. They're used by millions of people, and they're well tested across all these different devices that we have. They allow you to design and develop interfaces a lot quicker, which, in turn results to leading, to launching to the market faster, which is always important. And they're super popular. What's not to love about frameworks? And you'd be right, all these things are true. Bootstrap is the most popular repo ever. It has over 100,000 stars on GitHub. There's also Foundation by Zerb, and Foundation is great at being responsive, and it certainly speeds up your development times. Semantic UI is another cool framework that's doing some interesting things about trying to create this commonly shared vocabulary across all of our interfaces, which is nice. It's very semantic, and it makes sense when you're reading through it. So like I said, frameworks are cool, deal with it. But they don't always cut it. And if you're going to use a framework, you're inherently going to subscribe to doing things a certain way. You may find that your interfaces start to look like everybody else's, right? Which brings me back to this guy. So, I got Brad Frost's book and I started reading it, and he has this really cool anecdote about when he was a kid. He used to watch like a bunch of sci-fi movies and Star Trek and all that kind of stuff. And the one thing that always bothered him was how everyone's always dressed the same. I thought that was interesting. And as a kid, he said, well, I just concluded that, by the time we get to the future, they just solve fashion. So don't have to really worry about it anymore. But the reality here is that you got 7 really cool, unique individuals here, but they're all dressed tremendously similar. Just like if you had 7 really cool ideas for a website and you use the same framework for all of them, they would probably look pretty similar. So as I was researching this idea, I came across this website. It made me laugh. And I think it more accurately depicts the problem with frameworks. This website's pretty, it's responsive, but there's nothing super unique about it. It just feels too familiar. Now, if companies like Nike and Puma and Adidas all use Bootstrap to make their websites, they would all feel substantially the same. And I think you guys know that brands and organizations aren't all about being the same. So again, frameworks are cool, but you do have to subscribe to this one-size-fits-all methodology. Sometimes the framework will fall short and might not have everything you need in it, and therefore you'll end up doing some of your own custom development and designing anyways. You can have compatibility issues. Class names can start stomping on each other, or maybe it just doesn't mesh with your current setup. But the one real clear thing missing from both frameworks and these online style guides we talked about is a lack of clear methodology. Which brings me to atomic design. So what is atomic design? Atomic design is a methodology. It draws parallels from our natural world into how we design these interfaces. So in order to wrap your head around this, you're going to have to think back to high school chemistry class a bit. I know it probably wasn't your favorite, but bear with me. So in the natural world, there are these things called atoms. These 2 images here depict dot diagrams. I don't know if you guys remember this homework yet at all. So you got 1 hydrogen atom and 1 oxygen atom, and they each have their own unique properties. They can't be broken down any further without losing their meaning. And if we combine these molecules, or if we combine these atoms, we'll form a molecule. In this case, we've created water. Now these molecules start taking on their own unique properties. 2 gases have combined to create a liquid. These molecules combine to create even more complex molecules. And these complex molecules, well, they compound even further to become simple organisms. These simple organisms form together and create more complex organisms, such as humans. In our case, everyone here today at Minibar. But yeah, the takeaway here is that all known matter in the known universe, possibly even other dimensions if you've seen Interstellar, spoiler alert, are comprised of this finite table of atomic elements. And it just so happens like we have the same thing in the web as well. There's this guy named Josh Duck, and he put together the periodic table of HTML elements. And it's really cool. You guys should check it out. There's meta tags, table elements, headings, all of these elements that we work with to create our UIs. And like the natural world, we have a finite list of elements that we have to work with to create our interfaces as well. So knowing that, we can now apply that same process to the methodology comprised of 5 distinct steps. This methodology can help us craft and develop a design system. So in atomic design, atoms are the building blocks of our interfaces. These are our inputs, our labels. They're anything that can't be broken down any further without losing its meaning. They're often abstract elements that can be combined together to create something meaningful. They're usually not very useful on their own, and they're good for at-a-glance reference, like understanding your color scheme, typography, form elements, and they become actually really great reference point for your style guide. So here we have a label, input, and a button, right? And so for the developers out here, the code for that is pretty simple as well. And the next stage is molecules. So molecules are a grouping of atoms. They're bonded together to create something we can start to use. They're more concrete than atoms, and they serve a very specific purpose. That purpose is to do one thing and do it well. And they structurally serve as the backbone for our UIs and their layouts. So here we can see we've combined our 3 atoms, and we've created a molecule. Together they form a search molecule. And we see these, pretty frequently. And again, the code for this hasn't changed a whole lot. We still have our 3 elements, and then we've just wrapped them in a form tag. Our third step in the methodology is organisms. And organisms are distinct sections of your interface. They're formed by combining atoms and molecules together to create something very purposeful. Sometimes they can feel just like complex molecules. And the reason they form is to become reusable components that you'll see repeated throughout your UI. Excuse me. So for example, we have a header on a website, right? It's usually on every page of your interface. You have an atom logo, maybe a navigation molecule, and a search molecule. And they're all working together to create a header organism. And again, pretty simple code. Ignore the curly braces for now. We'll get into that a little further into the talk. But you see these things everywhere, right? So a lot of different websites and interfaces have some kind of header associated with them. And again, like all of these things we build can only be created from these list of HTML elements that we have. So next is templates. It might seem kind of odd to introduce templates into this molecular nomenclature we're talking about. But as you move on to stage 4 and 5, you got to start thinking about your clients and your stakeholders and being able to talk to the people that are going to be reviewing your interfaces. And at this point, I just want to point out atomic design is not like this rigid dogma you have to follow. It's flexible. It can be tailored to meet your needs. So for example, GE adopted this methodology, and instead of using atoms, molecules, and organisms, they used principles, basics, and components, and that made sense for them. At Virtual, we're using most of the nomenclature, but some of them are changing as well. We're still kind of trying to figure it out, and that's fine. It doesn't matter as long as the core concepts remain intact. So templates are where we start to see the components working together to create a structured layout. They're page level. Here we are talking about pages again. Like I said, it's a common nomenclature in our industry. These are more concrete ideas for our interfaces, and they serve very specific purposes. And many times they're seen as kind of like the final delivery for a project. And here's what they look like. A lot of times they're pretty empty shell, and that's a good thing. A lot of times we'll fill them with lorem ipsum content, and lorem ipsum is good. It allows us to put placeholders in and see how the layout is going to look before we can actually add real content to it. And lastly, we do have pages. And like I said, at Virtual, we're actually calling them samples. It just made more sense for us, and it got people on the same page. And pages are high fidelity. We start to see real content get plugged into these templates. And at this point, you can start bringing everyone in to have a look. You can have your BAs come in, your project managers, and everyone can start to, review these final concepts. You can plug different data sets and test different variations of your templates, which allows you to test the effectiveness of the system. You'll find out whether your responsive web design techniques are actually working. So yeah, here's some content. Bam, right? You start to see it come to life. You start to see if your headlines are wrapping the way you want them to, if your images are fitting into the containers that they need to be. And if you start to see issues here, this is where you can go back, into like the atoms or molecules at more of an atomic level and start to adjust and tweak so that these final pages start to look the way you want them to. So that's kind of the methodology in a nutshell. It's important to note that this is not a linear process. As you're going through this, you'll see you start with something very abstract, and you'll traverse across the methodology to create something more concrete. And what you'll see is that it starts with us, the creators, and then as we move along the timeline, it becomes something more reviewable. It's more in a review stage for clients and stakeholders. But the real work happens in the middle. So as I was saying, you learn from what you test. You start messing with stuff at the molecular level, and you fine tune your responsive designs until you create something that is fully reviewable and something that you like. So at this point, you're probably wondering, like, well, how do I build like this? How do I do it? And that's where Pattern Lab comes into place. Pattern Lab is a toolkit. It's here to help you build and maintain your own atomic design system. It was created by this guy with some help from this guy as well. So what is it? Well, Pattern Lab is a component library because, as I said before, what we should be designing is a system of components. It's a pattern library. It has code snippets and standard examples for your components. It's a design system builder. It seamlessly organizes your patterns into front-end style guides. It's also a practical viewport resizer, so that you can properly test the rigidness of your interfaces in the browser. And it's also a design annotation tool. So you're also gonna have the ability to document things the way, why you designed them a certain way, and you're gonna have an ability to annotate your patterns as you go through it. So what it's not. Pattern Lab is not a UI framework. It's not like Bootstrap. It's not dependent of any languages, styles, or workflow. It's not rigid at all. As I mentioned earlier, you can use whatever tools you want with it. It's not just a pattern library because it's more than just a static style guide. There's a lot more going on behind the scenes. And it's also not a production-ready static page generator. And it's good to know. It's not Jekyll. It's not a CMS system. It's a tool to help you with your designs. So you can go to patternlab.io and check it out. They have a few different editions that you can play with. It all started with PHP, mostly because that's all Brad Frost knew how to code in. But now there's also Node versions as well. They're using Gulp and Grunt. And honestly, I've forked my own repo and used it with Webpack as well. So there's a lot of different things you can use with it. And at the end of the day, you can use basically whatever you want with it. At Virtual, we're creating some Angular apps that we're creating a style guide with. I've also done it with just static sites as well. So yeah, the technology you want to use is at your own fingertips, and you can adjust it the way you want. But at the end of the day, what Pattern Lab is, it's really two things. It's a builder and a viewer. So I'll start off talking a little bit about the builder. So yeah, if you pull down the repo, you'll see something like this in your code. So on the top here we have the folder structure, and the bottom here is what the viewer would actually look like in the browser. So what the builder does is it uses your folder structure to create a navigation for your pattern library. And you can see kind of the similarities here, right? Like you have your patterns folder, which then correlates into atoms, molecules, organisms, etc. And if you dig deeper in the directories, you can see how the organization of the patterns works. Right, so we're doing the molecules here now, and you can see within the molecules I have 7 different patterns here: block patterns, form patterns, layouts, and all of those are generated in the browser as well. And then you have the patterns themselves. So patterns are comprised of 2 things. Usually there's a markdown file and a mustache file. Like I said, there's PHP versions of this, so it would be a PHP file instead. Or you can use whatever templating system you want. The reason that they do use a templating system is so that you can plug data into it. And we'll kind of see how that works in a minute. And the markdown file is so that you can start to provide information about the pattern. And we'll see how that builds out. But these files are, they're pretty small, and that's what's nice. There's not a lot going on, and it allows you to keep your patterns pretty modular. So combining these 2 things, what the builder will do, it goes through a process and it outputs your pattern for you in the browser. As I was talking about with the curly brackets, so you can see up here, it looks like there's not a whole lot of information going into this block quote, right? It looks like, what does that mean? And really all you need to know about it is that it allows us to be able to inject data into those spots. So for example, you could use like a JSON file. And your JSON file obviously has, keys that it references, and you can start to inject different sets of content into these templates. And this is what Pattern Lab does for us, right? Here's what it's generated. It's pretty simple. When you do download Pattern Lab, it's going to come with very, grayscale default patterns, because you do that yourself. Like I said, we're not talking about flat design today or how we're actually going to do that. We're talking about a system where you can create your own, design system. So that's what we'll see in the browser for one specific pattern. In this instance, it's I've labeled it a text pattern, and it's a block quote molecule. And if we open up the tab to the right, we'll start to see the markdown information. So you'll see on the left-hand side, all of that description that we need to put about the block quotes is in there. And then we'll also have a tab for our mustache template and our rendered HTML. And as I was talking about with the data, this is what the rendered HTML actually would look like. Right? So we pulled in that information from the JSON file, and we plugged it into the block quote, and we have our Wikipedia reference. And what's nice about that is basically you get to, you can change up one file rather than having to change the whole pattern, right? You can just sub in different JSON files and see how that affects your templates. So let's dive into a little more advanced concept in Pattern Lab, and that's its ability to annotate patterns. So right out of the box, Pattern Lab has annotations built in. You can see that basically what you use is just some selectors to highlight certain sections of the UI. So for example, we have, number 2 is a logo. And there's a selector in the builder that you can say, okay, add some more information to the logo, because I want to be able to tell the people that I'm working with what it's about and why I'm doing it the way I'm doing it. So for example, in this one, the logo, they talk about they're going to use an SVG file, and then they're going to use a fallback PNG for browsers that don't support it. So that gets, it gets your designers, it gets your developers, it gets your BAs, everyone kind of on the same page about why you're doing things. And it's a good reference tool as well. The other advanced feature in it is Lineage. And what Lineage allows you to do is allows you kind of to see how these patterns start getting built together. Without understanding too much about how the builder works, you can start to see that for this template, so we have a blog index template, and that pattern is contained of a header organism, a page header organism, a social or a section media list, and a footer. And yeah, if you were able to scroll down throughout that, you could see all those different patterns as well. So that's the builder. Now let's talk about the viewer a little bit. And I'm sure some of you guys are, at least aware of what some of these breakpoints and concepts are. So when we talk about design development, 320 pixels is the mobile device, a portrait landscape or a portrait view in a mobile device. 480 is landscape view. Tablet is 768 portrait view. Landscape or small desktop screens, 1024. The fold, I don't know how many times you guys talked about the fold, but how many times are we going to have that conversation? So anyways, the web is inherently fluid. So our job is to create interfaces that function beautifully on any screen, not just these arbitrary buckets that we have listed for us. So in Pattern Lab, we have this thing called ish. And what ish does is it allows us to see how our UIs view in large-ish mode, medium-ish mode, small-ish mode, right? So you kind of see how this resizes, and every time I click on the large mode, it's going to resize to be largest. So it could be 1024, 1014. Same for medium, small. You can keep hitting these different sizes, and it'll keep rearranging the UI for you. Ish also has some fun features like disco mode. And this mode abruptly resizes your browser to find flaws in the design. Make sure your wraps are working the way they should, making sure headers are resizing at the right time. And you can see, right? You can see how your sidebar comes up and down, and you would see problems if there was a problem in your design and things weren't wrapping properly. You'd see things overlapping and looking probably pretty awkward. Then there's also Hey mode. I thought this one was pretty cool. I don't know how you come up with it, but it kind of shows like the slow growth progression. So I don't know if it's like it's like, hey, I'm getting bigger kind of deal, right? It's a bit more meticulous than disco mode, but it really allows you to fine tune your design. So why Pattern Lab, right? As we talked about today, Pattern Lab serves as a hub during the design process. It's a useful tool for everybody, your information architects, designers, developers, stakeholders. You get to write your code as you please. You get to name things the way you want to name them. You can easily navigate from abstract ideas to concrete designs. You get to assemble a system rather than deconstruct one and put it back together. It encourages flexibility and fluidity, and you get to document your process as you go. So I think, as far as atomic design, I hope that, the one takeaway you guys have today from the talk, that atomic design is focusing on, designing components. And no matter where you are in the process of creating interfaces, whether you're in the planning stages, designing, development, QA, you can start to think about designing components as well. I encourage you guys to apply this methodology to your development techniques, share them with your design teams, and make your front-end workflows better than they were yesterday. I think that a lot of us are here today because we'd like to see the web become a more beautiful place, have better interactive experiences, and we all share just this overall goal that the web should be a beautiful place. Lastly, I got to give it up to this guy one last time. As he would say, work hard, don't be an asshole, and share what you know. I read his book. It's kind of got what me hooked on atomic design. And there's a lot more interesting stuff that you can learn in there about how to work with your team on getting it integrated in your workflows. I got the ebook for $10. If you guys feel like cutting your fingers on a paperback, that's only 20. So thank you for your time today. I do have a demo open if there's anything that anyone wants to see. I have a local version running right now if anyone has any questions. And I can go through things, or you can come up here and talk to me. But yeah, if anyone has any questions now, I'd be glad to take them. Shoot.
Do you use this at Virtual?
We do. So it's a recent thing that we've integrated. We have a pretty large Angular app, and we've actually integrated. So the way our process works is we actually do the development for the CSS framework in the main application, and then at the same time we're using the same build tools and the same CSS for both the application and the pattern lab. So they're sharing all the information, all the JavaScript and all the CSS, kind of between two applications, right? And then we're using Webpack to build out the bundles we need for each application using the same source code. Anybody else? Yep. Well, we're going through kind of a big transition from, we're basically combining two websites together. We have a desktop and a mobile site. So to be able to show them how difficult responsive web design is, and taking two completely different websites and merging them together. When I showed them this tool and showed them how I could get ahead of development and start actually creating components for other team members to use, it was a pretty much a no-brainer at that point to be able to share code. As you guys seen in Pattern Library, you have your mustache templates and stuff like that where you have snippets of code. We actually created, there's a plugin along with Pattern Lab that allows you to add different types of tabs in there. So we've created like an Angular tab, a TypeScript tab, and so you can go in and actually select some of those templates that are already created for you and drop them right into your application, and then you still have like one source of truth for your code. It may be tweaked slightly, but at least you have some of your controllers and components and stuff like that already spec'd out for a developer to get in there and use. Yep. Not so much. I think the hard part at first is to get everyone talking with the same vocabulary, right? So, like I said, we're using, when first time I gave this talk and talked to my developers, the one guy was at the end. He's like, "You told me we're not designing pages, but the last step is pages." And I was like, that's a good point, right? It doesn't make sense. He's like, he thought we were going to design every single page in our application, but that's not the case. We have certain templates that we're going to apply different samples of data to, right? So that's the hardest part. And the other thing too is, like I said about like organisms, right? Like organisms can sometimes feel like complex molecules. So you'll find yourself being like, well, is this a molecule? Is it an organism? Is it an atom? And so trying to get on the same page with that sometimes can be a little bit difficult. But like I said, it's really the core concepts and just starting to get people to think about it earlier that has really helped the team, take what we've done in an old application and start to, do it new. And to see the way like the code and the designs get broken up versus what they looked like before, I think that was a pretty easy sell for the developers, and they were really impressed with it. Yep.
Do you think this could be expanded to help with like corporate rollout of themes corporation-wide? So like you wouldn't just see these atoms. Like say you had an atom for the logo, you might be able to embed that atom into a PDF that marketing reports or something. Have you ever seen anything like that?
I haven't seen anything like that. I could see, something like that happening. I did show you guys Yelp before. Excuse me. And Yelp actually, so they had their brand style guys in there and stuff like that as well. they're actually now using, they kind of give a nod to Pattern Lab and atomic design. So yeah, I could totally see where you could actually take this. I mean, there's tons of ways to generate PDFs, right? And you could actually take this whole system and you could probably have different versions of it that, outputted an entire PDF, entire style guide you could share with marketing or something like that. That would have that kind of information in it for you, and along with that, just having like the annotations and all that kind of stuff is super helpful for someone new coming to the team or anything like that. So yeah, there's definitely it's super customizable. Like I said, it's not rigid at all. It's really just kind of a static page generator. It has, it's got a frame wrapper in it. So, you basically just have kind of all these styles that are created, and then you throw a wrap around it, and with that you could do a lot of stuff. Yep. Sure. I mean, I think you would just. So I showed you guys kind of a JSON file, right? So you could take that JSON file and you could have a different language in each one. And then you'd probably like parameterize a URL or something like that. And then it would grab the different JSON file and drop all that in there for you. I don't know of any plugins or anything like that. The community support it's not limited, but it's not Bootstrap and the frameworks like that. So yeah, I'm sure you could figure something out. Has anyone in here used Pattern Lab at all or these principles? Okay, I'll take it just a second, and I'll. We do have a little time, so I'll show you guys a little bit more about how Pattern Lab looks, and this is the out of the box look and feel that you get from the repo. Actually, I'm gonna do this just because then I can see what I'm doing. So yeah, kind of like as I said before, it kind of starts off with this reference of all these global styles that you have. So like I said too, it's also very grayscale, not a lot of color and stuff because you do that stuff on your own. But you can see, so in Atoms here we have all of our global styles here, things like colors, fonts, animations. And if you view all on these, you can see how these things will look. So you start to find your colors, your font families, simple animations, hover states for button and everything like that, form elements. So you have a pretty good start just off the bat with things that are in there for you, and a lot of them are things that you're going to need throughout an application. And then yeah, if you start to look at these patterns and how they look, we'll start to see things combine. Navigation is a good one. Right, so navigation molecule is really a combination of line items and a nav tag. Oops. And in here you can see, so we have our nav labels, and you keep all that data in a JSON file, so you can create different navigation looks. So maybe you had like eight things in the primary nav versus 4, but at the end of the day, it's gonna render all that for you, and you're gonna see what your JSON output is. as you get deeper into it, you start to see the combination, and this is where we see kind of the talk of lineage that I talked about. So since we're using Mustache as a templating engine, Pattern Lab knows when you use a Mustache include like that, that pattern is going to be contained, one within in this pattern, and it's going to be used in other patterns as well. So the inheritance that these patterns have is known by the builder. And that's what makes it easier to, for these annotations to go across all of these different templates as well, right? Like you do it once, you do it in one, you do it right in one spot, you do it well, it carries out throughout the entire build. Yep.
So type of the annotations earlier, do they show up in the template somewhere, or I don't see how the logo is referenced to?
So yeah, right here. So number 2 up here.
Yeah.
So that's gonna correlate to annotations down here.
Yeah, but like, is it in the Mustache template, or how does it go?
So there's selectors. Oops. It's in here somewhere. Right, so we use L. I don't know if you can see that very well. And again, yeah, just a JSON file. You use L for your selector, and then you can add an annotation to it, and those will carry throughout. And then, yeah, so then you get to things like the home page. Oops. Homepage template. So we have, a hero, a header, maybe, a section molecule repeated over and over and over. And if you look at, what the Mustache template looks like for that, so you have a hero, you have your list of items, your posts, and then your rendered HTML looks quite a bit different, right? Oops. And then finally, when you get to pages, or samples, or whatever you want to call them, you start to see how that information really starts looking here, and you start to see kind of a finished product. And if you look at the pattern info for this, you can see this is the Mustache. It's a template, right? So at this point, all we're doing is bringing in the template, and we're throwing a data layer on top of it, and all of that gets populated how we would expect it to look in here. And as far as the JSON file, that's pretty simple as well. And like we talked about, you could probably have different ones if you needed. So you can start to see images here, and you just have those referenced in your repo. And like I said, lorem ipsum is good for templating, but then when you really want to start populating real data, you can have a main data JSON like this, or you can have, once you get deeper into the pages, you can actually pair up a JSON file with an individual template. So like we talked about, you could have, am I running out of time? Okay, sorry. Well, yeah, thank you guys. I appreciate the questions. Yeah, have a good rest of your conference.